Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Injustice Podcast. I'm your host, David Greenwald. For the past 10 years, we've operated Vanguard Court Watches in California, including San Francisco, Sacramento, and Yolo counties. Our goal? Expose everyday court injustices, and now, more broadly, shine a spotlight on injustices in the entire criminal justice system, in the form of wrongful convictions, police and prosecutorial misconduct, and mass incarceration. This podcast hopes to take it a step further and highlight criminal justice reform on a national level.
Everyday injustice.
Today on Everyday Injustice, we have Marc Bookman back on the show, and we're going to talk about the Atlantic Center for Capital Representation. That's kind of a mouthful. Welcome back.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me again. It's a pleasure.
So tell us about the Atlantic Center.
So the Atlantic Center for Capital Representation, it is a mouthful. We refer to ourselves as ACCR generally. We formed as a small nonprofit in 2010. Our slogan, to this day, is trying to put ourselves out of business since 2010. We're a nonprofit that tries to help anyone facing possible execution. So it's largely pretrial cases where the state or more often the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has notified the defense that there is going to be a possible death sentence. We also do post-conviction work. We do some direct appeals. It's really largely for anyone facing possible execution. And in recent years, we've tried to expand a little bit to we did a lot of work with juvenile lifers, and we still do a lot of work out of Pennsylvania for lifers who really did not get a fair shake. And before we go on, I just want to say where people that are interested can go to atlanticcenter.org, which is our website, has a lot of stuff there. And I'll just so my development director doesn't kill me, I will mention that we rely on small donations and small donors to stay in business.
I know the feeling. So what led you to found the Atlantic Center?
So, back 13 years ago, there was a thought that the time was right to really kind of expose the death penalty for what it was, which was, in our view, an expensive, a drastically expensive, failed government program. So some larger foundations got together and tried to set up sort of a network of organizations that were badly needed. In the 90s, this might be a little bit before some people's time, there were resource centers that had been funded specifically to help people facing possible execution, and they had been defunded. So this was sort of a chance to bring that back. And there was pretty clearly a need in Pennsylvania, because then and now there is no state funding for indigent defense. And what happens is 67 counties in Pennsylvania are kind of fending for themselves, and we're trying as best we can to keep a thumb in the dam to help the people that are facing it. So that's how we got started, and it's been going, like I said, 13 years.
And it seems a little strange. I know you mentioned this last time we talked, that a state like Pennsylvania, kind of purple leaning blue, at least at times, would not have any state funding for indigent defense.
It's shocking. And I think, I think people have a misconception about Pennsylvania. Just geographically, we seem like a northeastern state, but our politics are often, southeast, I guess I could say. So yeah, I think it's very deceptive that way. And a lot of states, what we would refer to as the Death Belt states, the Carolinas, Georgia, Mississippi, many of them have a more organized state-funded system of capital defense. Pennsylvania has nothing. So pretty shocking.
And so is that really why you focused heavily in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia?
Well, so Philadelphia is its own story. Pennsylvania is unique in one significant way. So we have a large death row, over 100. The numbers kind of fluctuate because it sort of depends on how you do the bookkeeping. Someone might stay on death row after getting relief, because the Commonwealth might be appealing. So there's different ways of calculating who exactly is on death row at any given time, depending on where they are procedurally. But we our death row is over 100, and that's a big number. But we've had hundreds of reversals of death sentences, and we haven't executed anyone, except for 3 people who gave up their appeals. We haven't executed anyone in 60 years, other than those 3. So while we're seeking death regularly, we have 57 open capital cases right now in Pennsylvania. That's a big number, and yet we haven't executed anybody in 60 years. So you look at Pennsylvania and say, what in God's name is going on here? And we're spending a ton of money. There's nothing to show for it except reversal after reversal. And just to complete my thought, when you have a system that is reversing cases like that, like a department store revolving door, that's not fair to anybody. It's not fair to the defendants, but it's also not fair to the victims of crime. They have to relive this. They have to come back into court, 15, 20 years later. It's just not a system that's working. That's why we're calling it a failed government program.
And what specifically, and I follow death penalty stuff all over the country, so it's not necessarily like it works well anywhere, but it seems like it's worse in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so while I was talking about Pennsylvania, I didn't get a chance to talk about Philadelphia, my hometown, which I have described as like a petri dish for the death penalty. Philadelphia is its own very kind of interesting story. We had for lack of a better word, I will call them self-aggrandizing prosecutors for 35 years. I may be doing the math wrong. It may be longer than that. I'm going to start with Ed Rendell, who then went on from prosecutor. He went on to being mayor and then governor. We then went to Ron Castile, who became the Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court from being the Philadelphia District Attorney. And then we had Lynn Abraham for about 16 years, who was her own kind of, iconic figure in Philadelphia in what I would consider a negative way. Then we had Seth Williams, who went to federal prison. And so we've got this long list of kind of well-known, very aggressive prosecutors. And then from there, we go to Larry Krasner, who is kind of the first foremost reformer in the country, pretty much. And there's a culture shock there in Philadelphia. So we're based in Philadelphia. It's where I'm from. Is Philadelphia, but the need is so dramatic because for all those years, we had a prosecutor's office that was really kind of a runaway train. I mean, they were hiding evidence. There's prosecutorial misconduct. You could stack it a mile high. And then Krasner comes along, he opens the files, and, sunlight is the best disinfectant, as they say. So now you've got 40 years of injustice trying to get out into the sunlight. And that's Philadelphia,
So I'm curious, since you're kind of on the ground on this, I mean, in terms of, obviously, Krasner is no longer charging death penalty cases, but he's also had a pretty extensive, conviction integrity unit, and they've exonerated a number of people. So can you talk a little bit about what it's been like trying to deal with that kind of DA's office as opposed to, the more traditional type?
For 40 years, David, I could barely walk into the district attorney's office. I was a public defender for 28 years. And so, to say that there was hostility between the two sides would be an understatement, right? And then you've got Krasner. So the justice system is not supposed to work like a sporting event, right? The defense tries to win within the law, and the prosecutor tries to do justice. Now that's not such an easy distinction, right? It's understandable why prosecutors might get swept up in a certain amount of competition, right? Because they're looking across the aisle and they're seeing defense attorneys who are trying to win, because that's their obligation to do with zealous representation within the bounds of the law. So it takes a special person to be a good prosecutor, I think. And the atmosphere was just never there. So Krasner comes in and he's trying his best to do justice. And so the culture, there's a culture shock there. I like to think of it as, the Empire Strikes Back, which is, the legal establishment looks at Krasner and they're saying, what the heck is going on here? We've had 40 years of aggressive prosecution. Now we have a guy who's coming in. He's talking about cash bail. He's opening files. He doesn't want to seek the death penalty. It's a culture shock in Philadelphia. But working with that office has been, for lack of a better word, a pleasure. That doesn't mean we're going to win every time we bring something to their office, but at least you're going to get heard. At least you're going to get a fair review, which is something that we didn't have for all those years. Now, when we make a phone call, we get a phone call back. We get invited to show them what we have. That's a breath of fresh air, to say the least.
And Krasner, of course, a couple of years ago tried to challenge the state's death penalty.
Well, so we have right now a moratorium on the death penalty. That's a deceptive term, because what it means is that we're not going to execute anybody, but it doesn't mean we're not going to put people on death row. This is a little bit like the federal system, where for years we had no executions. I mean, there was no appetite for executions. And then Trump comes along and, in 7 months, he executes 13 people. So putting people on death row when there is still an active death penalty is a dangerous situation, because, governors are not there forever. And if as long as you have a death row, you have a chance for execution. Now, Krasner's office supported the moratorium, and that moratorium, is still in place. Governor Wolf served 2 terms, and now we have a brand new governor, Josh Shapiro, and we're cautiously optimistic that he'll keep the moratorium in place, mainly because none of the problems have been rectified in the death penalty in Pennsylvania.
And am I remembering this incorrectly, but did the legislature try to, or the attorney general try to prevent Krasner from trying death penalty cases, or?
Well, so they never actually did that. The legislature impeached Krasner.
Right.
That's a whole different story. But I think what you might be thinking about is a situation in Florida where a prosecutor, I think it was Orlando, or maybe it might have been Jacksonville or Orlando.
Artemis Iola.
Yeah. And so, the governor came in and said, we're not going to have that. Krasner they have not taken cases away from Mr. Krasner. And I think the reason is that Krasner has a committee that's making these decisions. Now, he's made no bones about the fact that he doesn't think the death penalty is a good idea, but he has a committee that is screening cases and making recommendations. And I think that might have been the mistake in Florida that Larry Krasner has not made in Pennsylvania. Nobody has tried to take cases away from him at this point.
Okay. There's just too much happening, and sometimes the brain just doesn't keep it all straight.
Yeah.
We were watching, Missouri and the Taylor execution, sadly. I don't know if you followed that one at all.
Well, I followed it from a distance because, frankly, I've been following a couple of other executions. One last week in Texas, Wes Ruiz, and another one that may or may not happen in a few hours in Texas as well. John Valentine, and I think that's how I pronounce his name. The Valentine case is particularly interesting. I think if you don't mind me talking about it for just a second, the lawyers in that case are from Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Capital Habeas Unit, which is the best group of death penalty post-conviction lawyers in the country. And I'm very, very proud to have them, in Philadelphia. But they're handling this case in Texas. And what they discovered is kind of a staggering amount of racism that took place in the case. Not only the foreman of the jury using the N-word, but which is kind of like harkens back to the essays we talked about the other day, but they found notes where one of the lawyers wrote, there's two lawyers, one of the lawyers wrote, can you spell lynching on his notes? And then the other one put I guess it's like an umlaut, a little one of those little triangles and he said, and he added the word justifiable. Can you spell justifiable lynching? Imagine that you're being represented by two lawyers, and at least one of them, if not both, think that this is what's going on in the courtroom is a justifiable lynching of their client. It's appalling, frankly, to have that level of representation. And that's the person who may be getting executed in a couple of hours in Texas, because the Texas courts so far have just seen no reason to consider that issue. Right now, I think as we're speaking, it's in the United States Supreme Court. And it's so hard to have optimism when you send something to that court these days. So that's I didn't follow the Taylor case quite as much as these two. I know Mr. Taylor had a what was a strong innocence claim, I think, but it again got nowhere.
Yeah, it just seems like there is really no fail safe here, and that gets back to what we talked about last week.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be too cliched here. When you say elections matter, you can't help but look at the United States Supreme Court as the best evidence of that. And I mean, I think the bloom is off the rose. I think there was a time when people may have thought that the Supreme Court gets its answers out of law books, right? They're a group of 9 very, very smart people. They're doing the research. They're really looking closely at past precedent and they're finding the answer that makes sense. But I don't know anybody that believes that anymore. It's basically just a political group up there making the decision that they want to make and then writing the opinion to support it. And right now we've got 6 justices who have made up their mind about the death penalty. And it's the rare case that, can penetrate their predisposed opinion at this point.
So back to, the Atlantic Center and your work, I understand you guys have been tracking death penalty cases and you have data. What have you found out based on this?
So, boy, I'm really trashing Pennsylvania today, but it's shocking that tracking capital cases falls to a small nonprofit in Philadelphia. How can that not be a state-run organization, right? But it's not. So we do our best. We're the only organization, I know we're the only organization in the state that actually tracks this data. And you ask, what does it show? Right now, it shows 57 cases, and because of the lack of a state-centered organization, there's nothing stopping prosecutors from seeking the death penalty. So as a glaring example, in Washington County, Pennsylvania, a county with 0.1% of the population of the state, there are now 12 active death cases, 12 out of 0.1% of the population. It's because there's a prosecutor out there, his name is Jason Welsh or Jason Walsh, who I assume doesn't understand the consequences of what he's doing, and just willy-nilly seeking the death penalty against anybody he can. That's not a way to run a system. So, that's what our tracking shows. We can see where the balloon starts to get bigger and bigger before it pops. And right now it's Washington County, which is just below Pittsburgh. And other than Philadelphia, there are cases everywhere. And like I said, the Atlantic Center just is trying to keep its thumb in the dam. We're in pretty desperate straits, I would say, right now.
And talk about your work on the resentencing of minors in Miller v. Alabama.
Yeah, that was really so. Once again, Pennsylvania led the country in the most. We led the country in the most juvenile lifers, over 500 in Pennsylvania alone, and Philadelphia led that group with about 300 of those. So we were really the epicenter of that juvenile life revolution that took place. Miller versus Alabama came down, I guess it was 2012. Pennsylvania did not accept that ruling. There was a lot of litigation about whether it was going to be retroactive. And so it wasn't until Montgomery versus Louisiana, which I guess was 4 or 5 years later, that the issue got settled. And then all of these juvenile lifers in Pennsylvania came back for resentencing. And so, the law for the death penalty and the law for juvenile resentencing, the juvenile resentencing law came from the death penalty law, basically. Miller versus Alabama, if you read that opinion, you would see a lot of discussion of the tenets of capital representation, which is individualized sentencing for the most part. So when you have mandatory sentences, you don't have individualized sentencing. And so that's what prompted all of these resentencings. And what we learned from that, which is, I think, a lesson that I really wish would be wider known, is just how many of these juveniles who were put in prison for life as lost causes, after 20 years, after 25 years, some of them significantly longer, had no business being in prison. They had utterly reformed themselves. Their behavior was they'd grown out of the bad behavior. They had not had any write-ups. They were ready to return to the community. And what we learned when they did return to the community was that their recidivism rate is very, very low. And I'm close to a number of them at this point who we've represented and who we've helped represent. And it was really an eye-opening experience, not so much for me because I knew this already, but I think for the public to see just how reformed and ready for release these people were. If it wasn't for that juvenile revolution, they would still be in prison, and we would be continually incarcerating people that absolutely did not need to be there any longer.
And then finally, what else are you guys working on? Current projects, upcoming projects?
Yeah, so let me just kind of do a sort of a rundown. What the Atlantic Center does, we really we try to consult on as many open cases as we can. I sort of consider myself a minister without portfolio. I have no, we're there just to try to help. We have no government authority or anything like that. We have a mitigation specialist on staff. We have a second lawyer that we have just hired on staff. So we're now expanding. So we try to consult with as many capital teams as we can. Then we do trainings at least once a year, and now once a month. Our mitigation specialist, Kaylin Christian, is running these monthly CLE trainings, and after we've done, I have individual cases, of course, that I represent people on, and so does Kaylin and our second attorney now, Francis Harvey. Along with that, like I said, with the level of injustice that has happened in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania, but a lot in Philadelphia over these years, there is a desperate want for any kind of help. So we get a lot of calls to please look at my case. And like you said earlier, we try to work closely with the Conviction Integrity Unit. So the work is, it's expanding. We don't handle low-level felonies or anything like that, but we are trying to get to help with life cases that are extraordinary and that real injustice has taken place. So we're trying our best to keep our hand in everything, really. And again, I hope the listeners will go to atlanticcenter.org to get a broad sense of really everything that we're doing.
You stole my last question.
No.
What would you say is your biggest need?
Well, I'm not going to lie about it. We were laughing about this early on. As a small nonprofit, resources are everything. All the money go. We don't have a hot tub in the office, right? The money goes directly to services, and there's such a need in Pennsylvania for this. It's heartbreaking to say. First of all, we don't have what in federal court they have, like the First Step Act, they have Second Look Acts and different. We don't have anything like that. We've got thousands of lifers. We've got an active death row. Support, financial support is the be all and end all of any small nonprofit, and I'm not going to make any bones about it. If anybody's out there and wants to support us, take a look at our website first. See if it's up your alley. I think it will be. And that's what we're looking for.
All right. Well, thanks, Mark, for coming back on and sharing. Really, it's remarkable listening to the stories out of Pennsylvania, because you would think things would be better there.
David, I'm really appreciative of the opportunity that you have given me here. And I just want to thank you.
This has been Everyday Injustice. I'm your host, David Greenwald. Join us again next time for more tales from the injustice system.